Okay, John, it's been fun chatting with you about, your business and the stuff you know about helping people do well and get into college and as a stepping stone to launching their career. Again, obviously, I'm in a related business. So, what's one thing that families get wrong when they're planning their path to college for their kids that you wish they understood sooner?
Probably the most common one is that students and parents tend to assume that what is impressive at the high school level will be impressive at the university level, meaning a student who stands out in high school, who everyone says, oh, you should be more like that kid, is naturally going to be the student that colleges want, and that's just not true.
Great. So I find the same thing when you then look at performance required to get into, a highly regarded career start, where, what do employers look at? And the things that make people seem successful in college and in high school often don't translate to what employers are looking for.
Give me an example of that.
So there's like a threshold. People go, oh, I majored in X and I also got a minor in this. Oh, I actually double majored and I did another thing. And it's like, employers don't care. They really don't care, almost all of them. And you can tell by looking at, pick some high branded business and go for fun, look at how they recruit and the recruiting process. Your AI can tell you anyway. And you'll see that, for instance, a GPA, some of these employers need like a 3.2 GPA. Some of them need a 3.5, some need a 3.8, but there's a threshold. And once you cross that threshold, they're looking for other things, which is why a lot of the rest of their selection stuff involves very different things from academics and stuff.
So how would you differentiate? Like for me, every year there's like some population of students that come to us after admissions decisions have been rendered, and they're top of their class. They're super impressive, student council president, all of this, and what they want to do is they basically want to pay us to tell them why they didn't get in. And the answer is always the same. It's that, well, you're very impressive at the school level, but there's someone like you at every school. What is the equivalent of that in the career world?
Well, in the career world, if you want to go work at Goldman Sachs, Google, wherever, for every position that they're going to give, there's somebody else who has straight A's or a really impressive sounding degree from somewhere that sounds important. And so there's just loads and loads of people. You have to understand, what is it that the recruiter looks for that means they pick person A over person B? Because to the outside world, all these people look the same anyway.
Yeah.
It's like the super academic, like especially at the most intellectually demanding jobs where there's tough competition. To any normal person looking at every candidate to these businesses, they all look the same. They're all like top performers academically, done all this stuff. And so there's other things that differentiate you.
That ties into what I would say is sort of the second most common mistake that I see families make. I wonder if this sort of resonates with you from the career perspective, which is everyone seems to consider the perspective of the applicant and never consider the perspective of the institution.
Yeah.
So the fact that Harvard has X number of departments and they need students for each of those departments, and not all of those departments have the same volume or proportion of applicants, means some of those departments you'll have a much easier time getting admitted in those departments versus the oversubscribed ones like engineering.
The thing I think that's very interesting with this is that people spend so much time in the academic world. So obviously all the way up to 18, typically, or thereabouts before going to college. Then they go off to university or college and are spending another 4 years there. And all the people who professionally they're working with are teachers or professors or administrators in academia. And they by and large have no idea of what it takes to succeed in, quote, the real world. And people over-index on it, which is why, for instance, people think that doing extra degrees matters. And for most employers, if you look, except for very few, as you mentioned, engineering, for instance, but other than very few degree subjects that are more vocational in nature, you learn practical skills that you need in a particular profession, then nobody cares about your degree. And almost every high-end employer hires people with a general degree requirement, not a specific degree requirement.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that where these 2 points differ is that in your case, employers have these preferences for rational reasons.
Yes.
In my case, a lot of institutions have preferences that don't necessarily graph to what we think are rational. Like a simple example is like, I always tell families that if you want the secret to get into Harvard, the key is you drop out of your high school, you move to North Dakota, you get perfect grades, that'll be pretty easy for you. You get a SAT score over 1,500. You are now one of maybe 2 qualified applicants applying out of North Dakota. This preference, this geographic diversity preference isn't necessarily rational, but it is in fact a preference that is very predictable from these institutions.
Yes, and I love these stories you tell me. I remember you telling me one about, if you're applying to Princeton and you choose this particular major rather than this major, your chances quadruple of you getting in. Yeah. So I like the strategical lens of that, because what you're doing is you're starting with, what does the admissions officer make their decision on? And so what I'm saying is, start with, what does the high performance recruiter make their decision on? And I just wish families would look into that. And the reason, again, I talk about the academic side is, people are so over-indexed on academics and academic performance that they forget that success certainly in business and in the for-profit, not-for-profit world, government, is decided by other factors.
Yeah.
Otherwise, all you do is measure someone's intelligence, and then you'd have them run the world.
Yeah.
There are, of course, other things that are needed, and people are under-focused on that. And so I think that if people took just 10% of their effort on getting a little bit better in academics, and they stuck it into the other skills that matter, they would shine. They'll certainly do much better in the job market.
Yeah, that is 100% true in the admissions process, because academic qualifications are basically a function of grades and test scores. Whether you are academically qualified from the admissions perspective is basically a binary variable. You either are or you are not. Mm-hmm. So for all of these students, these top students that we see, they'll spend every waking moment trying to eke out the tiniest addition, like an extra 10 points on the SAT, an extra 0.01 on the GPA. From a strategic standpoint, it has no bearing whatsoever on whether they get admitted. Like if you have a 1550, there's no school at which getting a higher SAT score meaningfully improves your probability of success. So I think that like the idea of diminishing returns on that front, I think, is sort of universal. There was something that you brought up in our previous conversation that I want to talk about, which is this idea of sort of like the lemming ideas, the sort of like, I do this because everybody else is doing it. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you see it applied to sort of the career space?
I think people following the crowd, the problem in the applying to business side is that you have nothing interesting to talk about. And more importantly, you can't demonstrate other skills that you've done if you just copy everyone. And I think the lemming issue in applying to high-performing sort of career paths is that, again, people are just focused on their academics because the environment they're in is academic.
Yeah.
And they forget that it's the other things that you need to do. And so, for instance, people do things like, oh, I did this very impressive research internship in the summer, but they're planning to apply to a general management training position at a large multinational. Right. It's like, but they don't do research. They don't really care.
Yeah.
I mean, they might check the box on you did something or that, but you're 10 times better off getting some form of leadership or business experience.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in the kind of admissions context, where I see this most commonly is every parent and student being concerned with what competitions they do, what summer camps they attend. And it's like 99% of these competitions are functionally useless for the admissions process because there's just way too many of them. There's regional, national, local champions for each of these competitions. There's 10 different competitions for each subject matter. You just can't differentiate between these students anymore. And the same is true of these summer programs, is overwhelmingly they are useless from an admissions standpoint, but people spend tons of money and all of their time doing them just because they see other people doing them and they're like, well, that's obviously what I should do. I would say that like most of the problems at the highest level, or most of the misconceptions from the admission standpoint, comes from not understanding that your objective is to be different. Your objective is to stand out, not to be identical to other candidates, but being afraid of being different. Does that resonate on the career side as well?
I think the real gap on the career side is people don't look to understand what they're truly motivated to do.
Yeah.
In getting into college, you can kind of fake it. You see a lot of high-performing people, and they go do all these things. And do they really want to do it? Maybe not. Maybe they'd rather be at home knitting, or reading a book, or or just messing around with friends and going camping. Yeah. But they're doing all these activities and things, right? Yeah. The problem is you end up then as a junior engineer at Google, sat there programming something, and you just don't know, well, why are you doing anything? Like, because you spent your whole life trying to achieve a position and you haven't understood what you fundamentally like.
Yeah.
And I think finding out what you fundamentally like is much more important. So for instance, or finding out what you don't like.
Yeah.
So when my old consulting business, when we were recruiting, we got to a certain point on things like your SAT score, which signals a certain level of intelligence. It correlates with like 0.8 regression, okay? But once we got to a certain point in our recruiting process, we just didn't care about that anymore. It was all the other factors. And something as simple as, if you could demonstrate that you knew something about the environment that we operated in as a consulting business, then we now know that you're not going to hate the work we do on day one. We don't want to hire someone who is going to hate the work on day one. And so we would look for, given the areas that we specialized in, and they knew this coming in, did you have some work experience or have you gone and done some things? Like, is there something you can show that you understand the nature of it? And that doesn't have to be the same. It could be adjacent. I'd say, like, if you're going into a management position, management training program, then you don't need to be like head of student council, but demonstrate some things where you've like worked with groups of people, you've had to, corral a bunch of resources to do something as trivial as planting a tree at the park. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be impressive.
No, I agree with that. To wrap up, 30 to 60 seconds. I'm a 22-year-old. I'm going to embark on a career. Let's assume that I want to have a highly compensated, powerful career. I don't really know in what industry necessarily. With that vagueness, what would be your best advice for me?
That's easy. So decide what you think you'll enjoy and make that decision. And don't worry about anything else. The prestige, the pay, initial pay, because all that matters is that you perform well and that you learn. So in your first few years, your earnings are irrelevant.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, great. Well, I started a startup and we sold it for $1 billion. We're not talking about that. That's just an anomaly. And so for me, for instance, I had a number of job offers coming out of an undergrad at Oxford. I wasn't inspired by any of them. So I went and did a 1-year course at Cambridge. And on that course, I found a really small consulting business that recruited from the course. They were pretty badly organized, but I liked what they did. The sound of what they did, I liked. And so I joined them for 60% of the pay. And also it was a no brand. I had like branded offers from businesses. And some of my friends years later said, I thought you kind of failed in that because you went to Oxford, then you went to Cambridge, and then you got a no-name job with some company nobody had ever heard with.
Right.
But the point is I really enjoyed it. So I leapt out of bed in the morning. I worked as hard as I could to learn how to be good at it. Yeah. And I was able to do that and put that effort in and sustain it because I was intrinsically interested in the work that was done. And that's what I would say is my advice.
Got it. I think that's great advice. I don't actually think that mine would be much different. I guess what I would say to the average college or even graduate school applicant is, putting aside all of the noise around admissions, it basically all boils down to just two things. And the first is, are you academically qualified, which is, as I said, a function of grades and test scores, and it's kind of a binary variable. But more importantly, the second variable, and that's really what gets you in these days, is, are you an expert at something in particular? Have you identified a passion or an interest as young as possible, developed it in clever, unique, sophisticated ways, not just doing, robotics competitions and things like that, but like actually developing a product and selling it or patenting it, but developing real expertise for your age group so that if I'm an admissions officer and I look at a student's file, I can look at it and say, this is the most advanced student I've seen applying this year in X, where X is their field of passion. But we've worked with thousands of students, and what we have found is that if a student doesn't genuinely love the thing that they're focused on, they will never commit the amount of time and energy it takes to develop true expertise in it. You have to start with, what are you passionate about?
Yeah, and I think that's great. And I love hearing you talk about that because it resonates for me. The thing I'd say with trying to get into a high-performance career, to get a start rather than entrepreneurial where you're creating your own path, but where you're going to get a job with someone, which is what most people do. I think the issue there comes back again to understand what you're really interested in and understand that your specific expertise or passion that is like the sort of thing that you talk about that the admissions officers want, I don't think is very important at the employment level. It's other things. It's showing that you are interested in and can work well with people. It's these general performance skills, but you could have picked that up via anything.
Right.
So, I think the translation, the best practice would be, you're in high school or you're in middle school, there's some things you like. Take a risk and just focus on them. Yeah. You don't need to do the 10, 15 things that everybody's doing and have, the level 10 and 3 instruments and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. Just the things you like, just lean into them. Yeah. Because there's room for that. And then that will be something that's interesting to an admissions officer. And also when you get to the workplace, if you spend 10 years faking being interested in doing things because you feel you need to, you're missing out on all the time to develop and learn what you really like, and therefore develop all the ancillary skills and confidence that goes with that.
Yeah, we could probably say that for both admissions and in terms of employment or the economy, specialization is highly valuable because specialization makes you scarce. Scarcity drives value. And I think that's true both in the admissions process as well as like employers looking at you and saying you've had a particular area of interest. You're not just a kind of generalist who did all of the same student clubs on campus that everyone else did, et cetera, et cetera.
See, I think this is where we disagree. So I agree with coming in specialization is important. And I agree with your economic theory of if you're just a commoditized resource, how you even extract any value, right, in the workplace. But I think coming out and launching your high performance career, you need to have worked on the general skills because not many people have them. They all have these specific academic things, but very few people have developed genuine other high performance skills. And the reason they're important is because you can apply them to any career. And most people, if you talk to most successful people, they didn't wake up at the age of 14, know exactly what they wanted to do, and then pursue a 50-year career in that. I mean, the world's changing too quick anyway. So I think, yes, in the end, you'll have expertise in things, but in this critical period of time when you're maturing as a young adult and you're looking to launch your career, I think your specialization should be in the general skills, not in the academic ones. Academics can get you into the right course at college and the right college, but that's not what takes you forward, except in very, very specific fields that require that knowledge. And most of them require a postgraduate work anyway, in that case.
Yeah. I guess in the context of admissions, I'm sort of taking as a given that somebody is academically qualified, which I think in your construction, the academic qualifications have the same function in admissions as having these set of skills would have in your career. That is to say that the kind of specialization within a particular area happens after the fact and is very important, but presupposes that you have that baseline level of qualification. Yeah. There's lots more to talk about. I'm sure that we'll do this yet again, but I think right now both of us are hungry and we have to get started.
Yeah. Perfect, man.